So you are more than your physical body. You are a spiritual being, a soul. Beyond this dimension, we are timeless. We are beyond space, and yet we also live in these physical bodies and have human experiences. The truth is that every single one of us here has a unique purpose, has a unique voice, has a unique perception, and a calling that we are called to fill. And that is what our theme is for 2013. When we finally get around to answering this call, to answering our purpose and beginning to take those steps, there are moments when we have to cross a threshold into new territory, leaving what is behind, what is familiar, into what is new. And this is a process that we go through countless times in our lives, yeah? We do it when we become parents for the first time, when we go to school, when we move, when we start a new job, when we retire, when we begin a new relationship or end one, when we get that diagnosis from the doctor, when we have great loss and great luck. Usually we're called into new territory. How many of you are in new territory in the process of crossing a threshold? Wow. In the hero's journey, when we cross a threshold, usually there is a mentor, a magical being, a helper who is there to escort us as we cross this threshold. And our helper can show up in the form of a teacher, a friend, a coach. Perhaps we need training when we enter into the new territory, but it also can show up as a magical being or an angel or divine guidance. In other words, the unseen kind of helper that shows up in the inner voice. So in the month of February, we are talking about and looking at listening. Listening. How do we know when we hear the voice of God? How do we know when we are receiving divine guidance? So last week, obviously the first way that we listen is by shutting up, by being quiet, by meditating, by praying, by just being still. That in itself that's all we did. We've got it. But the Spirit of God also speaks to us in the form of intuition, that inner yes and inner no. And last week we talked about specifically dreams and how dreams can guide us in our lives, how they bring messages to us and guidance. And it wasn't limited to the Bible when, the wise men went home by another route because they were warned in a dream not to run into Herod again. So we too are guided in this way. So another way that God speaks to us is through the process of synchronicity. Another way of saying synchronicity perhaps is meaningful coincidences. You know those coincidences you have where you kind of get the goosebumps, or the hair stands up on the back of your neck, or maybe you think about it afterwards and you go, what are the chances of that happening, really? Some meaningful coincidences, some synchronistic events are thinking about someone that you haven't seen for a very long time, and then all of a sudden there they are. You run into them. Perhaps running into a really good friend in some strange place that you didn't expect. Or perhaps you've been ruminating about a problem, or you have a question, and then you receive that answer in a book or in a song. It comes unbidden. Sometimes a book will fall open to the page that we need to look at. Or this has happened to many of us, where you're thinking of someone and the phone rings and it's them, or an email. And sometimes synchronicities show up when our dream world bleeds through into our waking life. And again, I think we know that we have a synchronicity when we ask the question, what are the chances? What are the chances? So Carl Jung was the one who coined the concept of synchronicity. And he had an experience when he was working with a patient, and this woman was stuck. She wasn't getting anywhere. They were just spinning their wheels, and he wasn't sure what to do with her or how to direct her. And so she was telling him a dream. And in the dream, she was describing this golden scarab, this ancient Egyptian golden scarab that had appeared to her. And he had his back to the window, and as he's listening to her, he hears this tapping against the window. So he turns around and looks, and there's a bug banging against the window. He opens the window, he reaches out and he grabs the bug and he looks at it, and it was a beetle. But the kind of beetle that it was resembled the golden scarab that she was talking about in her dream. And so he simply reached out and he goes, "Is this the golden scarab that you're talking about in your dream?" And of course she looked at it and said, "Yes." And it was in that moment, he said, that her life began to change. Where they had been stuck, things began to move. And it wasn't only just a synchronistic event for her in her life with great meaning, but it also affected Carl Jung for the rest of his practice, that was a real important moment for him as well. In the book, Occult Processes Occurring During Psychoanalysis, which I think is a very interesting title of a book, the author says that evidence indicates that a synchronicity is a marker that a creative solution to an otherwise intractable problem has been solved. In my experience of these always impacting events, I literally experience my boundaries stretching. It is a marker that a creative solution to an otherwise intractable problem has been found. So one of the ways that I like to look at synchronistic events is like in Spain, in the Camino de Santiago. There are little yellow arrows all over Spain that tell you where to go. So you don't really have to think about it at all. It's like the arrows are in the alleys, they're on rocks, they're in the forest, they're on the buildings, they're in the cities, they're everywhere. And so in 2009, and I know Judy Gribble and Trudy Marie also walked the Camino, one never had to really think about where we were going because we simply had to look for the arrow. Now, sometimes there was a fork in the road, and if it was early in the morning and very dark, we'd have to get the flashlight and see if we could find the arrow. But the arrow was always guiding and directing us toward Santiago, toward the goal. I think that synchronistic events are like that yellow arrow. It's like God has put yellow arrows in our lives, and as we stop and listen, as we watch and listen to our lives, we receive those kinds of messages. I also think that sometimes we are the conduits for other people's synchronicities as well, that we're just not the only person who benefits from them. So there's big synchronicities in life, but I think where I'm calling us is to look for the little ones, the mundane ones, because as we begin to recognize those, we can see them expanding and growing in our lives. So a small example, I read a story about a man who was recently divorced, and he was obsessed about his ex-wife. And he would find, they kind of hung around in similar circles, so he kind of always knew where she was going to be. And so he would show up there, so that he could see her. And it wasn't good for him. It wasn't good for her. It was setting them back. And so he was really working with releasing. And then one day, when he was trying to figure out what to do, he was an actor. And he found out that the library was going to show a film of a play that he had just been signed to do. So here was his day before him. Choice: go to the library, watch the film in the play that I'm going to be in, or, I know my wife is going to be at this other place and I could show up there. And he said that he really got quiet and he thought, all right, what's the best decision I can make for myself? Go to the library. That's the healthiest decision that I can make for myself. And he said he felt this energy move through him and this power, like, yes, he had made the right choice. So as he was leaving his apartment, he got on an elevator, and there was a stranger in the elevator. And the guy just looked at him and said, "It's really nice to know what you want." And that was it. And he felt like this man was speaking to his soul, even though it appeared to be a random event. The guy just said it. He didn't know him. He didn't know what he was going through. And the guy thought, is he reading my mind or what? No, he said, it's nice to know when you have clarity. It's nice to know that. And he felt as if the universe were giving him a yellow arrow and pointing him in the right direction. So again, sometimes we're used by God, I think, in synchronistic events for other people. So an example, about 6 weeks ago or whatever, I was at Scott's Bar and Grill in Shoreline. I need to back it up a little bit. Many of you know that I have a 9-pound wire-haired dachshund named Geo. And Geo goes with me just about everywhere. She prefers to be with me rather than to be home or in a car, but then again, what dog wouldn't, I guess? And so a number of years ago, I bought at one of the pet stores a pink doggy purse that looks like something Paris Hilton would have. And Geo fits right in it, and when we go to places where we shouldn't be, she ducks down very low and gets very quiet. She never says a word. I zip her up in there. And what I've discovered is if I don't draw attention to her or it, nobody ever notices that I have a dog. And one time when my girlfriend and I when I was first trying this out, a girlfriend and I were going to dinner, and I said, "Can you tell that I have a dog?" And she said, "No, only that you have really bad taste." Big, giant, pink purse. So about 6 weeks ago, Kelly and I were at Scott's Bar and Grill, and of course I had Geo in the purse, and we walked in and they said, "Well, we don't have a table, but you can go sit in the bar for a little bit until we have one for you." I said, "Okay." So we walk in and I put Geo down like I normally do, it zipped up, no attention, and the waitress walks up to us and she looks me right in the eye and she said, "Do you have a dog in that bag?" And I became 10 years old. I said, "No." And she said, "No, you have a dog in that bag." And I said, "No, I don't. I don't." And she laughed. And after she left, I looked at Kelly and I went, "Oh my God, what did I just do? I feel terrible. That was terrible. What did I do?" And he said, "I'll go get her and bring her back." So he goes and he gets the waitress. He says, "Yes, we do have a dog, and if you'd like us to leave or send her out, we'll do that." And she said, "No, I want to see the dog." So I opened it up a little bit, and she looked at Geo, and she just melted. And she said, "My husband works here. Can he come and see her too?" And, I like, well, maybe after we eat, we can go outside and we can look at the dog. So we did. So after we had dinner, we all went outside with the dog, and it had turned out that they also had a wire-haired dachshund, which are very rare. I don't really see very many of them around. And their dog had been killed a few months before that in a way that was just horrible and they hadn't yet healed from. And so the four of us were outside in the parking lot with the dog, holding the dog and just, being really sweet with it. And, we talked for a while, and then they went back to work and we went on our way. And afterwards, we looked at each other, we were like, what are the chances? I mean, what are the chances not only that she was insistent about seeing the dog, but it was her very own breed that she had. And that's an example of synchronicities being used, that when we are being used by synchronicities, that there's some healing, that there's some movement, that there's an arrow, of spirit that is moving us forward. I also believe that we can call synchronicities forward in our lives. And this is a story that you've heard often enough about Gideon, but I love this story because it brings prayer and it brings Bible scripture into our daily life. So in the story of Gideon, he is a winemaker. He's a skinny guy. He's a skinny winemaker. And God says to him, I want you to lead the troops into battle. And, and he's like, I don't think you mean me. I think you mean my brothers, really, not me. And God is like, no. And he said, all right, God, if I'm really supposed to lead these people in battle, then I'm going to throw a fleece on the ground, and in the morning the fleece will be wet and the ground will be dry, and then I'll know that my divine guidance is to do this. So he wakes up the next morning, the fleece is wet and the ground is dry, and he's like, okay, how about I put the fleece out, and the next day the fleece is wet and the ground is dry. That's opposite of what I just said, right? Okay. The fleece is dry and the ground is wet. The fleece is dry and the ground is wet. So he does that next morning. Fleece is dry, ground is wet. Okay, God. So he leads the troops into battle. They win. And that's the story. But the truth is, we can also use that in our lives. So if there is a decision that you need to make in your life, you can call forth and say, okay, God, show me, give me a sign. So a small example, and again, I'm using small examples today instead of big ones, because we find God in the mundane. We find God in every day. We see the little miracles and we see the guidance. So about 4 years ago, I was thinking about getting a new car, and I was talking to my daughter about it, and I've always wanted a Prius. From the time they were created, I have wanted a Prius. And she's like, Mom, get a Prius. And I said, okay, but they're not really that cheap, so it's not like a small decision. And she's like, well, I think you should get a Prius. And I said, all right, let's cast a fleece. So if she was going out with her friends, I said, if within the next 2 hours you see 100 Priuses, then I'll know that we're supposed to get a Prius. Little did I know. So we're out doing our errands, and I'm getting texts over the next couple of hours. 25 Priuses, 45, 120 finally. She was over the mark. And then she calls me at the end, and I said, are you making this up? And she said, no. And of course, it's Seattle. Every other car is a Prius, isn't it, right? But she calls me. She had to pick up a friend at the airport, and she says, Mom, there's a billboard with a giant Prius on it. I think you need to get a Prius. So I did, but it took me 3 more years to actually go ahead and get one. And the truth is, I love it. I absolutely love it. It is, it's great gas mileage. We have some beeper going off somewhere. I don't know where it is. It's the God calling thing again. So again, this is more of a mundane. So if there's a decision that you have to make, if there's something that, is guiding you, put it out there and see what happens. Make it a little unusual, but not very, enough where you can go, okay, give me some signs here. The teachings of Vedanta said that 2 signs of awakening and enlightenment are, 1, that we stop worrying. Jesus said, do not be anxious about what you'll wear or what you'll eat. Let it all go. Do not be anxious. The truth is that when we worry, we are praying for what we don't want. We are praying for all the things that could go wrong and directing our energy in that way. The other sign of awakening and enlightenment is meaningful coincidences, is synchronicities. It is as if there is a yellow arrow guiding us. So as you cross the threshold, whether you are there or not, you will be again if you're not there now. As you cross the threshold over into new territory and new learning, know that there are guides, that there are mentors, both in the physical form as teachers and coaches and friends, and there are the unseen guides in the form of angels, in the form of the still small voice, in the form of meaningful coincidences and synchronicities, and in the form of intuition. When you find yourself saying, what are the chances? You know that the hand of God has touched you. Thank you.